Okay, so money, right? It's this thing we all like deal with it every day, but honestly, sometimes it feels like the opposite of straightforward.
Yeah. So,
It's
okay.
tied to our security, obviously, but also like our dreams for the future. And let's be real, sometimes a good chunk of anxiety too, you know?
Hmm.
So today, we're going to try to like cut through all that noise, all that complexity.
Right.
We're diving deep into a book called The Geometry of Wealth. Subtitle is How to Shape a Life of Money and Meaning. It's by this guy, Brian Portnoy.
Okay.
And think of this deep dive as like your express lane to really understanding what financial well-being is all about
Makes sense.
and how that ties into, living a good life, a life that feels like fulfilling.
Absolutely. And the great thing about Portnoy's book is that he really does try to simplify this really complex world of money and meaning.
Yeah.
Our goal today is to really pull out those core ideas. What are the things that really matter to you? What's going to make a difference in your life? We want to give you those insights, like as efficiently as possible,
Right.
without overwhelming you with all the typical, financial jargon that can make this stuff so confusing.
Yeah.
So you walk away feeling like, okay, I get it.
I can actually use this.
Yeah,
I
I'll
can
definitely
actually use this.
exactly. So the way Portnoy structures his book is around three, let's call them core ideas.
Right.
And these will guide us in our conversation too. So first, it's about defining your purpose,
Right.
really getting clear on like what actually gives your life meaning.
Right.
Then second, it's about setting your priorities.
Mm-hmm.
So once you know what your purpose is, you can figure out, okay, how do I create a focused strategy
Right.
to like make sure my money, my financial resources are actually aligned with that purpose.
Makes sense.
And third, it's about like making smart decisions,
Yeah.
using tactics that are like simple but really effective.
Right.
So you get better outcomes. You're not just, spinning your wheels.
Yeah. But what's really important is that Portnoy emphasizes how you need to like adapt all of this as life throws you curveballs,
Hmm.
which it inevitably does.
It always does.
Yeah.
And a big part of that adaptation is simplification,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Because life gets messy. Our finances get messy.
Totally. And one of the things, I guess, central themes that Portnoy brings up, which we'll be returning to throughout this conversation,
Right.
he talks about the difference between being rich and being wealthy.
Yeah, there's a huge difference.
And he's like, being rich is simply about having more.
Just more and more and more. Yeah.
But being wealthy, he says, is about achieving what he calls funded contentment.
I love that phrase.
It's a great phrase.
Funded contentment.
So it's not just about, how big is your portfolio,
Exactly.
but it's like, are your finances actually supporting you in a way that makes you feel like at peace, content, fulfilled?
Right. It's about aligning your money with your values and your goals.
Exactly. Instead of just chasing this like ever increasing number,
Just chasing the number.
he wants you to like really think deeply about, okay, what level of financial security, what does that look like for me? And does that bring me contentment? That shift in focus is like so crucial.
I think it is. It is.
Before we jump into all that, just a little bit of background about the author, Brian Portnoy. He has a PhD.
Yep.
He's also a CFA, which is Chartered Financial Analyst, for those who don't know.
Right.
He's the Director of Investment Education at Virtus Investment Partners.
Impressive.
Yeah, so he's spent like 2 decades in the investment world, worked with mutual funds, hedge funds. He's been in the thick of it. But his aim, which really aligns with what we try to do here, is to like empower individuals.
Right. Give people the tools and the knowledge.
To make like wiser financial choices, which ultimately lead to a more meaningful life.
Yeah, I think that's really important.
So let's jump into the first part of the book, which he calls Taking Shape. This is all about understanding ourselves, like who are we, what are our tendencies, but also understanding the financial landscape that we're all like navigating.
Right.
And he cooks things off with some, I guess, pretty stark data about retirement preparedness, specifically in America.
Yeah, it's a little bit eye-opening for sure.
It is. He points out that almost 40% of American workers, they have no retirement savings whatsoever.
Wow.
None. And then even among those who are saving, there's a significant chunk who have less than $25,000 saved.
Okay.
Or even $100,000 saved. And Portnoy emphasizes that even $100,000, when you think about it, providing income for potentially decades of retirement, it's not going to generate a huge monthly amount.
Right. You're spreading that over a very long time.
You are, yeah. And this highlights this real challenge that, a lot of people face.
Definitely. And what makes it even more challenging is this kind of collision between, On the one hand, this increasing personal responsibility.
Mm.
We're all expected to, like, manage our own finances, save for our own retirement.
Right.
But then on the other hand, we have all these, like, emotional biases and tendencies that often lead us to make, like, the exact opposite of what we should be doing.
Right. Yeah.
Especially when things get a little bit, rocky in the markets.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a bit. He talks about how often our emotions lead us to buy when prices are high and sell when they're low.
It's almost like it's hardwired into us.
It's like this knee-jerk reaction. When the market's tanking, we get anxious, we want to pull out.
Right. You see the numbers going down and it's like, get me out of
Let me
here
out. Yeah.
before I lose everything.
I'm going to lose everything. Exactly. But then when things are booming, we jump in, often at like inflated prices.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because it's the exact opposite of how we act as consumers.
Right. It's the opposite of how we shop for, like, anything else.
Exactly. If something's getting more expensive, we don't rush to buy it.
We wait for a sale. We look for a deal.
We wait for a sale.
We're like, oh, that's too expensive now. I'll wait till it goes on sale.
Totally.
But for some reason, with investing, it's like we do the opposite.
We do the opposite. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
And Portnoy uses the 2008 financial crisis as like a powerful example of this emotional cycle in action.
Yeah, it's a perfect example of how fear and greed can really take over.
Totally. So it is a very human response.
It is. It's totally understandable.
But one that can really undermine your long-term success.
Yeah, it can really hurt you in the long run.
Yeah. And I think what's really valuable here for the listener is to like start recognizing this tendency.
Right. Just becoming aware of it is the first step.
In yourself. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Now let's zoom out a little bit.
Okay.
Because Portnoy brings in this idea from Schumpeter. It's called creative destruction. So within capitalism, how does this like apply to how we think about our financial lives?
So Schumpeter, he was an economist, and his idea was that capitalism is this like dynamic process. It's constantly in upheaval. It's like, new innovations, new industries, they emerge all the time. And in doing so, they disrupt and often replace, the older ways of doing things, the old industries. And he called this the gale of creative destruction.
Okay.
It's a really powerful image. It's this force that's always pushing things forward, always changing things. And it's a fundamental engine of economic progress.
Right.
So for your financial life, this means a few things. First, the landscape is always shifting. You can't expect things to stay the same. So you have to be adaptable.
Right.
You have to be able to adjust. And second, what worked in the past is not guaranteed to work in the future.
Right. Yeah.
So you always have to be learning. You have to be evolving.
Totally. And speaking of the future, Portnoy talks about this, like idea that the investment returns that we saw, say, over the last 30 years.
Right.
But they're probably not going to be the norm going forward.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to understand.
So why is that so important for us to like recalibrate our expectations?
Because it's easy to look at the past and think, oh, well, the stock market always goes up. I'm just going to ride that wave.
10% every year.
Yeah, 10% a year, easy peasy.
Right.
But the reality is that the last 3 decades, they were kind of this perfect storm.
Okay.
A perfect storm for investors. So you had stocks delivering returns that were way above their historical averages, like significantly above. And then you had bonds, which, they're supposed to be the safer asset.
Yeah, the more stable one.
They experienced this massive bull market, which was driven by consistently falling interest rates.
Okay.
So interest rates have been going down for decades,
Yeah.
but they can't go down forever. There's a limit.
Right.
And to give you an idea of how much they've fallen, back in the early 1980s, interest rates were like around 17%.
Whoa.
So imagine getting a mortgage back then.
Right.
It was a very different world.
Yeah.
So now, with rates at these historically low levels, those conditions that fueled those really high returns, they're unlikely to repeat.
So they're not going down much further?
They're not going down much further. And the stock market, it can't just keep going up at that same pace forever. There will be ups and downs.
Yeah.
So current projections, they're suggesting that future returns are going to be more moderate for diversified portfolios. And we're talking about like in the range of 4.0% to 4.5% annually.
Okay.
So that's still decent growth.
It's still growth, yeah.
It's still growth, but it's not the 10% that a lot of people have gotten used to.
Right, right.
So your financial plans, They need to reflect this new reality.
Definitely.
You got to be realistic.
Yeah. So, okay, we're facing this constant change.
Right.
We're facing potentially more modest returns.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we keep our financial lives on track?
Right.
And Portnoy introduces this concept of adaptive simplicity. What's like the core idea behind that?
So adaptive simplicity, it's about finding that sweet spot between being organized, having a clear plan, but also being flexible,
Yeah.
being able to adjust when things change.
Right.
Because life throws you curveballs.
Yeah.
The market goes up, the market goes down. Unexpected expenses pop up. So you need a framework for managing your money that's simple enough that you can actually stick to it,
Right.
but also flexible enough that you can adapt when you need to.
Right.
It's also about being willing to update your understanding as you go along, because the world changes, our circumstances change.
Totally.
And sometimes, the stories we tell ourselves about money, they need to change too.
Yeah.
It's like being willing to rewrite the script as you go along.
Totally. Okay, and he also touches on the role of psychology and specifically mentions Daniel Kahneman's work on the two systems of thinking.
Yeah, the famous System 1 and System 2.
Yeah. So can you just remind us of what those are briefly?
Of course.
And how they play into our financial choices?
So System 1, that's your fast, intuitive thinking. It's very emotional, it's automatic, it's effortless.
Okay.
It's like your gut reaction.
Okay.
System 2, that's your slower, more deliberate thinking. It's logical, it's analytical, it takes more effort.
Okay.
So System 1, it's great for a lot of everyday decisions. But when it comes to something as complex as finances, it can lead us astray.
Right.
Because it's driven by emotions, and emotions can be very powerful, especially when it comes to money.
Yeah, definitely.
So, for example, the market suddenly drops, your System 1 might kick in and say, sell, sell, sell.
Well, get out.
Get out before you lose everything.
Yeah, yeah.
But your System 2 might say, wait a minute, this is just a temporary dip. My long-term plan is still sound.
Right.
I'm going to ride this out.
Right, yeah.
So the key here is to be aware of when System 1 is taking over, especially in those moments of stress or excitement.
Yeah.
And then try to engage your System 2. Make more rational, thoughtful decisions.
So kind of override that initial instinct.
Exactly. Take a step back, breathe, and think things through.
Yeah.
Don't let your emotions make the decisions for you.
Okay, now let's turn inwards a bit.
Okay.
Because Portnoy explores this question of what actually determines our well-being, our overall sense of happiness and contentment.
Yeah.
So what are the key factors he highlights, and how much influence do they have?
He talks about three main contributors.
Okay.
The first is our disposition.
Okay.
So that's our genetic set point for happiness. How happy are we naturally? And that accounts for about 50% of our well-being.
So it's a big chunk.
It is a big chunk.
Okay.
And there's our circumstances.
Okay.
So those are external factors like, our job, our relationships, our health. And those only contribute about 10%.
Oh, wow. So much smaller than I would have guessed.
It is surprisingly small.
Yeah.
And then finally, there are our intentional actions.
Okay.
So these are the choices we make, the things we do. And those make up the remaining 40%.
Okay.
So that's a pretty big chunk.
It is.
And the really empowering message here is that while your genes play a role, there's still a lot that's within your control. You have the power to influence your own happiness.
Right.
Through your choices, your actions, your attitude.
Okay.
And that includes how you manage your money.
Yeah, yeah.
Are you using your money in a way that's aligned with your values?
Right.
That's supporting your goals? That's contributing to your overall well-being?
Definitely. Okay, he also talks about something called hedonic adaptation. What is that?
So hedonic adaptation, it's basically our tendency to get used to things.
Okay.
Both good and bad things.
So, we get a raise and we're happy for a little while, but then it becomes the new normal.
Exactly. Or let's say you win the lottery.
Right.
You're ecstatic at first, but eventually you adapt to that new level of wealth.
Yeah.
And your happiness kind of goes back to where it was before.
Interesting. So it's it's not permanent.
It's not permanent.
That initial spike.
Exactly. And it works the same way as negative events too.
So losing your job or going through a divorce.
Yeah. Initially it's devastating, but over time we tend to adapt.
Okay.
We find a new normal.
So I guess it's like our brains are wired to kind of return to this baseline
Yeah, there's like this set point
of happiness.
of happiness.
So if we tend to adapt to both, like the good and the bad,
Right.
what's the point of planning for the future
Right. Why bother?
if we're just going to end up back where we started?
Exactly.
And Portnoy emphasizes this idea of principled planning and resilience.
Yeah. He says it's not about the outcome. It's about the process.
Okay, so why are those so important?
So taking control of your finances, making a plan, developing good habits,
Mm-hmm.
this actually makes you feel better.
Yeah.
It gives you a sense of agency, a sense of control.
Yeah.
And that's really important for well-being.
It's like even if the outcome isn't exactly what you planned, you still feel like you're in the driver's seat.
Exactly. It's like you're taking responsibility for your life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's empowering.
Yeah.
And then resilience, that's about being able to bounce back from setbacks.
Mm-hmm.
Because let's be real, life throws you curveballs.
Yeah.
You're going to have financial ups and downs,
Mm-hmm.
but it's how you respond to those challenges that really matters.
Okay.
It's like having a prepared mind. You know, a pastor said, chance favors the prepared mind. So if you have a plan, if you have good coping mechanisms, you're going to be able to weather those storms
Yeah. Yeah.
and come out stronger on the other side.
Definitely.
So it's not just about, avoiding bad things.
Right.
It's about developing the skills
Yeah.
and the mindset to deal with them when they inevitably happen.
Okay.
And that's what resilience is all about.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the second core part of the book, which he calls purpose. And this is all about like the connection between happiness and money.
Mm-hmm.
And he starts this section off with a really great analogy.
Oh, yeah.
He uses Dr. Seuss.
I love Dr. Seuss.
Oh, the places you'll go
Such a classic.
to illustrate like this idea that life's path,
Mm-hmm.
it's often like unpredictable. It's nonlinear.
Right. It's not a straight line.
It's not a straight line. It's not like A to B to C.
It's more like a roller coaster.
It is a roller coaster, yeah.
There's lots of twists and turns.
Yeah, totally. And it requires us to be resilient.
To keep going.
Keep going.
Yeah. Even when things get tough.
And I think there's this one line from the book that really captures this. It's fall 7 times, stand up 8.
That's such a powerful line.
It is.
It's a reminder that we're going to face setbacks. We're going to fall down.
Mhm.
But it's our ability to get back up
To get back up, yeah.
that really defines us.
And that's true for all aspects of life, including our finances.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're going to have financial setbacks. You're going to make mistakes. You might have some bad investments.
Right.
But it's about learning from those experiences, getting back up, and keeping moving forward.
Exactly.
Okay, and then he talks about how our understanding of happiness itself has like evolved over time.
Yeah.
So can you touch on some of those like historical perspectives that he brings up?
Yeah, so he kind of goes back to ancient Greece.
Okay.
Talks about Aristotle and his idea of eudaimonia,
Eudaimonia.
which is this idea of like flourishing,
Okay.
living a life of meaning and virtue. And then he fast forwards to like the modern world and talks about positive psychology, which is this field that's really focused on like scientifically studying happiness
Okay.
and well-being. And one of the key figures in positive psychology is Martin Seligman.
Okay.
And he argues that we should be focusing on like individual subjective well-being. So basically like how happy are people feeling?
Oh, yeah.
And what are the things that contribute to their happiness?
Okay.
And what's interesting is that, especially since the Enlightenment, there's been this increasing recognition of individual contentment as a legitimate pursuit. So it's not just about, duty or obligation.
Right.
It's about actually trying to be happy.
Okay.
And this has had a big impact on, not just personal choices, but even public policy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a pretty big shift in how we think about happiness.
Totally.
And it's interesting to see how that's played out over time and how it continues to shape our world today.
Definitely. Okay. And then he makes this interesting point that there isn't like one specific demographic that defines happiness. It's not just about checking certain boxes.
Yeah, it's not like, oh, if you're this age and you have this much income and you live in this place, then you're guaranteed to be happy.
Right.
It's much more complex than that.
Right. It's not just about demographics.
No, it's not.
So if it's not about simple demographics, what is it about?
Right? What are the ingredients for a happy life?
Yeah. And Portnoy introduces this framework that he calls the 4 C's for a meaningful life. So what are those?
Okay, so the 4 C's are connection, control, competence, and context.
Okay.
And he argues that these are the building blocks for achieving that funded contentment we talked about earlier.
Right.
So let's go through them one by one.
Yeah, let's break them down.
Okay.
Okay, so first, connection. Why is that so important?
So connection speaks to this fundamental human need for belonging, for social interaction,
Right.
for feeling connected to other people.
Okay.
We're social creatures by nature.
Yeah.
And there's a ton of research that shows that strong social relationships are one of the biggest predictors of happiness and well-being.
Okay.
And actually, there's a neuroscientist named Matthew Lieberman,
Okay.
and he argues that our brains are literally wired for connection.
Interesting.
He calls them social brains.
Okay.
And he says that this need for connection is just as basic as our need for food or shelter.
So it's like essential for survival.
Yeah, in a way it is.
Okay.
And on the flip side, social isolation and loneliness, those have a really negative impact on our health,
Okay.
both mental and physical. They can even contribute to cognitive decline.
Wow.
So for you, the listener, what this means is that nurturing those meaningful connections,
Yeah.
it's not just a nice to have.
Right.
It's essential. It's a key ingredient for a fulfilling life. And it's something that your financial decisions should support, not hinder.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, next, control. So what's this inherent human desire for self-determination about?
So control, it's about feeling like you have agency over your life.
Okay.
Like you're in the driver's seat. You get to make choices. You get to set goals. And then you get to pursue those goals.
Okay.
The philosopher Isaiah Berlin, he talked a lot about liberty and how important it is for human flourishing.
Okay.
And this need for control, it's a big part of that.
Yeah.
It's about feeling like you have a say in how your life unfolds. And there's research in psychology that shows that when people feel like they have control, they're more engaged, they learn more effectively,
Okay.
they're more satisfied with their lives.
Interesting. So it's even if you don't have complete control over everything,
Right.
just the perception of control can be beneficial?
Yeah. Even if it's an illusion of control,
Okay.
it can still be helpful.
Interesting.
And this sense of control, it's important both in anticipating events.
Okay.
So like planning for the future.
Right.
And also in responding to events.
Mm-hmm.
So like when something unexpected happens, how do you deal with it?
Right.
And this is where resilience comes in.
Okay.
Because resilience is about being able to adapt, to bounce back, to learn from those experiences.
Yeah.
And there's this interesting finding that a little bit of adversity in life, it can actually be a good thing.
Okay.
It can make you stronger.
So it's like going through those challenges actually builds your resilience.
It does.
Interesting.
It's like, if you never lift weights, your muscles are